Right, so thank you everyone for coming. I will get started. So my name is Susie Hawkes and I'm a lecturer at the University of Wolverhampton. This event is an event for World Social Work Day, and it is entitled Engaging with Roma Communities. Just some brief housekeeping at the beginning. Just so you know that we won't, if you've got any questions, if you could submit them into the question and answer section rather than the chat, because often the chat gets too busy for us to pick out questions from it. So if you've got any questions, we will have a question and answer session at the end. If you could put them into the Q&A section, and then hopefully we'll have plenty of time to respond to them. Just to be clear that the event is being recorded, and it will be eventually uploaded to the University of Wolverhampton Social Work YouTube account, where you'll be able to re-look at it, and any colleagues that haven't listened or weren't able to attend will also be able to watch it. But just be mindful that obviously the things that you write will be recorded. So if you are able to use the chat function, and at points in it, I will put some links to things that are mentioned, reports and websites. And obviously this is a public platform, so just be careful not to write anything that's confidential and that you don't want to be put into the public arena. So that's the sort of basic housekeeping. So thank you all again. Thank you all for coming. We're really happy to have you at this event for World Social Work Day, which is today, the 16th of March. The theme of World Social Work Day today is Ubuntu. I am because we are, strengthening social solidarity and global connectedness. So a message of global solidarity within communities, society, and globally a message that all people are interconnected. World Social Work Day is a celebration that aims to highlight the achievements of social work and raise the visibility of social services for future societies, defend social justice and human rights. And every year, World Social Work Day is celebrated on the third Tuesday of March. So the first World Social Work Day was held in 2007 under the theme Social Work Making a Difference. And you can find out more about the history of World Social Work Day on the web pages of the International Federation of Social Work. So this year, our event is going to focus upon engaging with Roma communities. Nikola is going to talk a little bit about Roma diaspora and the history of Roma people in Europe and beyond. But by way of introduction, I just wanted to say something briefly that the Roma people are one of the communities in the world that are widely dispersed across the world, across Europe, America, the Middle East, Asia, North Africa. And the numbers, there are no real reliable figures for the numbers of Roma people throughout the world. Last year in September, the European Agency for Fundamental Rights released a report in September 2020 called Roma and Travellers in 6 countries. And this report highlighted some really shocking statistics about Roma people and travellers and how they lived and what they were enduring in Europe today. So the Roma survey report found that over 90% of travellers in Belgium, Ireland and the Netherlands say that there are not enough places for them to live. Every 4th Roma and traveller child surveyed lived in a household that couldn't afford basic items such as healthy food, heating, or had trouble paying the rent. Many faced hunger and their life expectancy is 10 years lower than among general populations. Fewer Roma and travellers are in paid work compared to general populations, and this ranges from 15% in Ireland to 50% in Belgium. And for women and the young, the employment situation is particularly bad. In relation to schooling, almost a third of parents said their children had been verbally harassed at school because they are Roma or traveller, and 2/3 of young Roma and travellers complete only their lower secondary education. So in that context, we thought that having a conversation about Roma people and how as social work we engage with Roma people was particularly important. So to help us discuss this subject, we have firstly Professor Violeta Vidaček Hainš, who is from the University of Zagreb. We've got Nikola Gulasova, who is a social work student at the University of Wolverhampton, but is a Roma person herself and is also the founder of an organisation called Roma Reach, which provides advice and training, translation and all sorts of other services for local authorities and other organisations and engages with Roma people. And finally, we have Dr. Elaine Arnold, who is the Deputy Dean of the Institute of Society and Community at Wolverhampton. I will let them all introduce themselves in more detail and tell you a little bit about themselves, but we're really grateful for everyone's contribution today, and hopefully we can have a good discussion about how we can, as social workers, engage better with Roma communities and more effectively. So I will hand over to Violeta to begin her presentation. So thank you.
So thank you very much. First of all, I would like to thank University of Wolverhampton. I would like to thank Dr. Elaine Arnold for invitation. I would like to thank you, Susie, for organizing such a great event. And also, Nicole, thank you for your motivation and thank you for sharing your experience. So let me introduce myself. I'm Violeta Vidaček Hainš from Croatia, University of Zagreb. We are university, pretty big university, 75,000 students from 17th century, and here is Croatia. University of Zagreb is here at the northwest part of Croatia. Personally, I'm working for the Faculty of Organization and Informatics in Varaždin. This is a little bit dislocated faculty. I'm psychologist, and it's my great privilege, and I'm very honored to be today with you. Thank you very much for your participation. What will be the content of this presentation? I would like to start with multiculturalism and some cultural dimensions that are different in different countries, in different cultural environment. Then explain the challenges of Roma national minorities in Croatia, particularly in this northwest part of Croatia where we live. Then very shortly introduce the details about the National Roma Inclusion Strategy, and also one practical example that we have with Professor Elaine Arnold, and thank you very much for giving us opportunity of Intercultural Community Project. That was a joint project between UK and Croatia. So Dr. Arnold will explain you a little bit more from UK point of view, and I will just explain our great experience in this project. Also, I would like to apologize for my accent. As far as you know, English is not my mother tongue. So if you don't understand some things, please just feel free to write the comment in the chat. So when we are talking about multiculturalism and intercultural competencies, the main idea and the main goal that I would like to share with you is that intercultural competence is linked to our knowledge about different culture, it's linked also to our skills for listening, for observing, for understanding other cultures, and also to our attitudes. So how do we respect? how we are open to other experiences, and so on and so on. So, according to definition from Encyclopedia Britannica, it's very important to say that minorities and multiculturalism in general deserve special acknowledgement of the differences that they have. So, very briefly, United Nations Declaration of the Rights of Persons belonging to national or ethnic, religious, or linguistic minorities have the rights that national minorities can enjoy their own cultural, their own religious, and their own language, which is very important. Then all participants or people that are parts of national minorities may have their own associations, may participate in public life, can make their own decisions, and also have right to be part of groups at local, national, and international levels as then, as I mentioned before, Roma national minority in Croatia is right here in north. Majority of them are in northwest part of Croatia, and this is a great opportunity for all of us to learn something about their language, something about Vidački dialect. We say in Croatia that's a dialect that they speak that they use in their families. So what is exactly the position of Roma minorities in Croatia? Here is one research conducted at nearly 4,000 respondents, and 1,100 were from Roma population. So the fact is that 45% of Roma children are included in preschool education, and the average in Croatia is 63%. Then nearly 89% of Roma children are in primary education, and the average in Croatian population is 92.7%. Then 45% of Roma students are included in secondary education or in high schools, and the average in Croatia is 81%. So just to explain you, high school in Croatian terms means education from 14th, 15th until 18th or 19 years old. And at the end, we also have 15% of illiteracy among Roma population, and in Croatia, this is less than 1%. So, the strategic framework that is developed for next 10 years have the basic question. This is the question from Commission President Ursula von der Leyen, who asked, where is the sense of humanity when every single day Roma people are excluded from society and others are held back simply because of the color of their skin or their religious belief? In terms of numbers, when we are looking how many people are from Roma population, from Roma national minority living in Croatia, the number said that 70 years ago we started with 400. Last census said that there are 9,000 people that are members of Roma national minorities in Croatia, and 2011, this last census, the number is increasing to 16,000 of members of Roma national minority. Then In terms of number of people that are living in Roma families, the average in Croatia is that Roma families has 7 or more members of family, then 6 members, 5 members, and less. That's opposite to the numbers of Croatian population. For example, in Croatia, families have 1, 2, 3, or 4 members. That's something that is very, very often and very, very usual. So the main strategic areas that are part of national Roma inclusion strategy from 2013 to 2020 are focused to the main aims. The main aim is to improve the status of Roma minority in the Republic of Croatia in the field of education, employment and inclusion in economic life, in healthcare, social welfare, physical planning, inclusion in social and cultural life in different associations, and also status solutions like prevention of discrimination and assistance in the human rights. So, according to that area, because I'm a little bit more include into the education, so I will just share the goals of education or national Roma inclusion strategy linked to the area of education. So the goal is to raise the quality and efficiency of education for all participants of minorities. That also includes Roma national minority. Also, to increase the inclusion of Roma children in preschool and early childhood learning. So I'm just coming back to the issue that they speak a different language in their families, and they have challenges when they start preschool education or when they start primary education. In Croatia, primary education is for children that are 6 or 7 years old. Then the goal is to bring much more children to primary education, and that those numbers will be nearly the same, or the same, sorry, that will be the same like in Croatia in general, and also to abolish all separate classes, because that's not very good for for children from Roma national minorities, and also other children, like children from other national minorities in Croatia in general. They can learn about the cultural differences and similarities, and they can also learn a lot about Roma cultural, and it's a great opportunity. Then, if we are talking about secondary education, also the goal is to reduce the difference between average inclusion and completion. This is very important, because we have a lot of high school students who just enter the education, and then the dropout rate is pretty high. And also the same goal with higher education. So the inclusion and completion to higher education is also one of the priorities. And it's very important to mention the inclusion of Roma adults in literacy, because all various opportunities in general education, vocational and higher education can be good start for their labor market and for finding their further career. Then another thing that is very important to mention is that the cultural environment is different in different countries, and also we have different challenges according to differences linked to power distance, linked to individualism or collectivism. I think that probably some of you are familiar with HOFSTEDE'S cultural dimension, then dimension of masculinity or femininity, uncertainty avoidance, difference between long-term and short-term orientation, and indulgence or restraint. So in terms of Croatia, comparing, for example, with UK, the challenge for people from national minority is first of all in power distance. In Croatia, the level of power distance is very high. For example, you can compare it with United Kingdom, which is much lower. So people are struggling with trying to approach to different issues in our culture because of very low power distance. Also, uncertainty avoidance for example, in Croatia is also pretty high, according to questionnaire developed by Hofstede, and this is also another challenge. So we can discuss about the different dimensions. I will not go very deeply into that model, but just to be aware what does that mean that you are from one national minority and you try to be part of the global culture. So what people from Roma national minority do in Croatia, they start a lot of amazing activities. For example, this is Kali Sara association, and this association developed a lot of high schools, a lot of summer schools, a lot of different workshops for children. And this is the right place to learn about the history, about language, about culture in general. So according to, let's say, according to intercultural learning activities, we developed one project with UK. It's intercommunity learning project that was from Hillington in London and VARAŽDIN County here in Croatia. Then two elementary schools, Petrijanec and Jeding, and Berks University and Faculty of Organization and Informatics. So the main goals of that project were to raise the communication competencies and self-confidence for elementary school students or pupils from 8 until 12 years old. And in Croatia, it's very important to mention that this is one school here near in our region. 30% of pupils are from Roma population. Then the goals for our high school students or volunteers, the goal was to raise the competencies for communication in the international environment, competencies linked to Croatian language and linked to learning foreign languages like English language. As I mentioned before, families don't speak Croatian in their family, and children goes to primary education and elementary education very often without basic knowledge or with very poor language competence. So, as I mentioned before, higher education institutions like faculty where I work was very, very much involved into that project. Of course, Dr. Elaine Arnold will explain the project details very, very from a UK point of view and in much more details, but I just would like to mention that we try to raise social responsibility to our local community. It's very easy to understand why, because, for example, just one example, if you are a high school student in Croatia, you don't pay any fees. So our universities are free of charge. So we have primary education for all children without any fees, secondary education as well. So we had a lot of how to say, a lot of advantages that came from our local community, from our national government, and we just try that our volunteers will be responsible for that community as well. Also, we try to see the students' attitudes towards, for example, course-taking experiences and other issues that are here on the screen. So how did we start? We start with finding partners, you know, all those projects, EU projects, guidelines for applications. Then we started to read about legal issues for our volunteers because the partner school in UK also have their volunteers, their students, social work students who were involved into that project, and our students here in Croatia. We were very, very much focused to the code of ethics for volunteers, communication, and all other issues. So what was the research methodology? We developed a couple of questionnaires, for example, for children, if they like working with volunteers and so on and so on. For our students, high school students that are volunteering, they had interviews, focus groups, and so on and so on. Then interviews and focus groups with English language teachers from primary schools, and also parents from Roma community. That was extremely, extremely important interviews, and feedback from parents and from pupils was something that was the top of our, or those results were very, very important for that project. So I will not go deeply into the results, just very, very shortly, what was the report from pupils about volunteers. They said that they like learning English outside the class with our volunteers. They like their company, the communication, and that this foreign language was a little bit more interest, and it was something that was challenging for pupils, and it makes their foreign language classes also much more interest, and they are motivated for that. The second part of the project was dictionary, Croatian-English dictionary for children. That was amazing. They liked this very much. And at the end, we published intercommunity brochure. So Dr. Elaine was one of co-authors with all experiences, advantages and disadvantages, or all challenges that we were faced with during the project. And what was also very helpful, social media, web pages, local media. They published everything that we are doing all the time. Then, for example, a lot of flyers. Here are information about this project in Reading School here in UK. What was amazing, because children from both schools they are learning about different cultures. They are making a lot of Skype contacts, and so on and so on. And one of the very important follow-up activity was the increasing number of volunteering hours for our students and our teachers. What does that mean? So this was the beginning of the project, and after that we just we just noticed how volunteering is important, and we also developed other projects. Some of them were with UK as well, and our volunteers participated in those projects with a lot of motivation, and they were very happy to do that. Project results and conclusions, just very, very shortly. Students or pupils in elementary school raise their motivation for developing language skills. Students, volunteers develop their social competencies, and with that they started to be more competitive at the labor market. For example, I will let you know one example of my student. He said, I applied for a job and they asked me about volunteering, and I mentioned that volunteering project, so now I get this job. I don't know if that is because of volunteering or not, but at the end I have the job, and this is very important. And also we developed, or we have stronger link between higher education institutions in our local community and other local community institutions. Also, we developed a couple of other projects that are focused to underrepresented groups or underprivileged groups in general, according to gender, according to social economy status, or something like that. So here I would like to mention Girls Tell Stories. Thank you, Elaine, for including our students in that project as well. That was also amazing experience, just to that remind us how we need to think about some underprivileged groups of our students, or students in general. So here are the references, and at the end I would like to thank you for the invitation, and please, in case that you have any questions, I will be more than happy to answer at the end of this presentation. Thank you for now.
Sorry, I was muted. Thank you very much, Violeta. So Nikola, do you want to share your screen, and you can introduce yourself and go next? Thank you. You're muted, Nikola.
Sorry, it's my first time using Zoom for this, so apologies for the technical difficulties. Yeah. All right, you should be able to see my screen now.
We can.
Fantastic. Right, so my name is Nikola Gulasova. I am a social work student at the University of Wolverhampton. I am a Roma myself. I have worked with the Roma community since January 2016, cooperating with the local council and working with several different schools across the Wolverhampton area. So just wanted to thank everybody who allowed me to be part of this. I feel really privileged, so thank you. So International Social Work Day 2021, engaging with Roma communities. I want to start by introducing a brief history of the Roma, because the history is not very well known, so I do feel that's the best start. So the Roma have a quite mysterious history. They have one of the most dramatic stories in human history, but not many people know their ancient tale of travel and survival. When they came to Europe, everyone thought that the Roma came from Egypt, and they wondered what language they used. They faced a lot of discrimination due to their different skin tone, and also the traveling lifestyle. So the Roma originated from India. They left northern India about 1,500 years ago. They migrated through the Balkans about 900 years ago, and the reports confirm that they arrived to medieval Europe in the 1100s. So the big red dot is India, as you can see, and this just shows the direction of travel and how they arrived to Europe. So another thing I feel it's very important to mention is the genocide of the Roma. Not many people know that a lot of Roma lost their lives during World War II. It is quite difficult to estimate the numbers because the Roma did not have many documents, but it is estimated that 500,000 of Europe's Roma lost their lives during Second World War, and this is also referred to as paraimos. What's quite sad is that in the immediate post-war period, war crimes against Roma were not prosecuted. Survivors struggled to get any recognition or compensation and were not really mentioned in the monuments commemorating the Nazis' victims. For those of you who are interested, the Roma Holocaust Memorial Day is on the 2nd of August. So the music, the Romani are celebrated for their musical heritage, and they influenced jazz, bolero, flamenco, as well as classical composers. And music is quite interesting and important for the modern day Roma. The modern day Roma will be part of these little groups. They will post videos on YouTube of them singing as families, and every time there is a family gathering there will be plenty of music. Also, music as in learning musical instruments is very important in the Roma culture. They will encourage the children to learn how to play musical instruments from a very young age. So instead of focusing on teaching the child how to write the numbers or the ABC, the main focus, I'd say, is more on the music. So the language, the language is quite similar to Hindi, Bengali, or Punjabi. It is called Romanichip, or in English, the Romani language. It originates from Indian dialects and is spoken by about 5 to 6 million Roma people. The interesting thing about the language is that the Roma take the language from the hosting country as well. So for example, I was born in Slovakia, so my spoken Roma would take words from the Slovakian language, and the same goes for the Hungarian ones. So the Hungarian Romas will adapt their language to the hosting country, and the same goes for the Romanian ones. So it's kind of difficult to say that they speak one united language because there's so many dialects depending of where they were born or where they live. So just another example of how similar the language is to Punjabi and Hindi. So for example, an ear in Romani is Khan, in Punjabi and Hindi it's Khan. A nose is nak, in Punjabi and Hindi it's nak. And actually teeth, for example, is exactly the same, it's danda in both languages. Okay. So the Roma trades, in India the Roma belonged to a caste that worked in trades such as blacksmiths, grooms, horse traders, musicians, bear and snake trainers, potters and brickmakers. And this can also be seen today. A lot of the young Roma choose professions that are quite manual still. So they enjoy working with animals, they enjoy building things, working with wood. The cuisine, so the Romani have adapted their foods to their environment, wherever they may be. A traditional meal may include stuffed cabbage, different meats, soups, breads made with spices. The main ingredient used by the Romani people are meats. Many will say that meat is the gypsy vegetable, and those of you who will work with the Roma and will try to give advice about healthy lifestyles, I mean, it will be a challenge because we're quite stuck on the tradition of how to cook and the correct way of doing things, as they would say. Fashion. So the Roma are recognized by their unique dress sense. The traditional gypsy costume consists of bright colors, a lot of jewelry, scarves and headwear. And one thing I want to mention, that even though we will see Roma in the modern day not dressed in this way, they still find importance in the gold. So a lot of the Roma will buy quite a lot of gold for their family members or for themselves. And it actually is used as an emergency. If something happens, gold always has a value and it always can be sold. So in case there's an emergency, that's their way of keeping their family and the loved ones safe, knowing that there is something there that can be turned into finances. So there was a meeting in 1971, and it is called the International Gypsy Committee, and it was the first Romani Congress in London. At this meeting, the green and blue flag embellished with the red 16-spoke chakra was reaffirmed as the national emblem of the Roma, and the song Gelem Gelem was adapted as the Roma anthem. It is important to say that to this day, to 1971, the Roma did not have an official anthem. They did not have an official flag. It was attended by 23 representatives from 9 nations. Until this day, the Roma, as I said, did not have an official flag or a national anthem. And for those of you who are interested in listening to the anthem, there is a YouTube link that I will post in the chat in case you want to listen to that. And on the first slide, there was the Roma flag. So effective social work with the Roma. The Roma are often those who experience the involvement from social services, especially when it comes to children and families. And I feel that this is the part of social work with the Roma that requires the most attention. The lack of knowledge about how to deal with this particular group and rigid attitudes make it difficult to effectively resolve issues. And I have worked as an interpreter for several years, and I worked with many different social workers. And I actually seen the difference in those social workers who had some knowledge about the Roma culture and those who did not. Okay. So I want to go back a bit to the history, because I feel that this is the part that influences the way the Roma are in this present day. So in 1958, Maria Theresia of Austria introduced a program of assimilation. The government built huts that replaced tents, and travel was forbidden. They often removed children and placed them with non-Roma families. The Roma experienced restrictions of their cultural freedom. This has continued throughout the years, and actually the post-war period saw the biggest movement of forcing the Roma to live in flats and work in factories, and that's exactly what happened to my family. They forced my grandfather and my family to live in a flat in a quite big city, and he had to work in a factory. So some of the Roma adapted to this way of life, and actually it still can be seen that some still haven't fully adapted to this way of living. how the media portrays social services in the UK. So as you see there are two screenshots of YouTube videos, and this is done by very official TV channels, for example, like the BBC in the UK. So the first one says that another family's children were taken and the youngest was only 6 weeks old. The second one, a report about the removal of children in the UK. So this is how social services were portrayed a few years ago. I mean, these videos are from 2012 and 2013. I haven't came across many recent videos, but when the Roma come from Eastern Europe, and this is the idea that they have when there is a social work involvement. I mean, the social services, they just want to take the children away. So when working with the Roma, who are also immigrants, the barriers can be extremely difficult to break. And it is very important to be honest about why there is a need for intervention, and what are the possible outcomes, and what procedures will be followed. Because it is important to remember that they came to this country a few months ago, maybe a few years ago. They're still not fully familiar with how the systems work, and a step-by-step approach is probably the best way how to explain things and reassure them that if these things will be improved, the social services will not be involved anymore with the family. A lot of the time I've seen that as soon as social services knocked on the door, they packed their bags and they went back home. So common barriers. Safeguarding concerns require a lot of competency anyway, because I feel that nobody likes somebody coming into their home and telling them what they're doing wrong or what they're not doing. And also previous negative experiences of the Roma can influence how they interact with professionals and practitioners. The Roma place little importance to routine and timekeeping, therefore assessment should take this into account. So the Roma parenting style is kind of very warm, and they focus on giving the child what the child wants instead of having rigid guidelines and routines. The Roma from Eastern Europe find it hard to understand the UK systems. So, for example, a good example of the different system is probably the education system, because I work in education for several years now, and I see this pattern over and over again. So, for example, if I have a child in year 10 and I want to raise an issue, the parents will usually tell me that my child is in year 10, my child has not failed a class, and therefore there are no concerns. Because in Eastern Europe, most of the time, if the child doesn't complete all the tests or doesn't pass all the exams, they have to repeat the year. So it is important to start from the basics when working with the Roma and explain this is how the UK system works, and it will make your life and your job a lot easier. Extended family is extremely important for the Roma. You will see a family of mum, dad, 2-3 children, grandparents, possibly uncles and aunties living in one house, and they will all contribute to raising the children. So from my experience, when the attitude changes, everything changes. So I work in a school in Wolverhampton, and they saw an increase from 27% to 83% in Roma parents who attended parents' evening after they employed someone who was culturally competent. Many children who attended this school did not talk about their background or heritage. And then the school started celebrating Roma Day each year. And the children started teaching their peers how to count in Romani, and actually parents started changing their ethnicity on admission forms. Also, I've seen that social workers who gained cultural knowledge saw an improvement in engaging and often resolved issues without the need for further escalation, because they gained the trust of the Roma, and the Roma felt that they can cooperate and be open with them. So strategies. It is important to know when to ask questions, because some of the Roma do not want to disclose their heritage or background, and it's usually because of previous negative experience. So someone coming in into their home and asking them questions about their Roma heritage might be seen offensive, and it is important to know when to ask those questions. Because not everyone will welcome them. Treat them with respect and dignity, and you will get the same back. And also, do not impose own values and norms on others, just like you would do with any service user. It's basically the same for the Roma. Francis, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you, Nikola. That's great. That was really interesting. I really didn't appreciate that Roma people weren't compensated after the Holocaust in the war.
No, they weren't actually.
No, that's quite shocking, really. And there was no prosecutions of them for Roma people. So yeah, that's quite shocking. So yeah, that's interesting. Thank you. Okay. So and finally, we'll hear from Elaine, who is going to pick up on some of the things that Violeta was talking about, and the project that was done jointly with Croatia and the UK. So I am going to share the screen for Elaine. Oh, wait there. She says. Right. Sorry, 1 second. And is that okay? Can you see it now, Elaine?
I can, definitely.
Marvelous.
Thank you. Okay, everyone. Susie's sharing my screen for me because I just was concerned about trying to manage more than one thing at a time, talking and clicking my own screen. So thank you, Susie. Yeah, I think my presentation is going to very much pick up on, because it refers to the project that Violeta talked about between the UK and Croatia. I was at the time at Buxton University, and it also picks up on things that Nikola has talked about. So I'll be talking both about cultural engagement, which Violeta was talking about, and I'll be talking about social work engagement in terms of Roma families, but also working with families who come from different backgrounds from our own, and actually thinking through that cultural engagement and the engagement that we go through, learning about one another, understanding one another, and that exchange of knowledge that we need to go through. If you can click me on, Susie, I would be grateful. I'm afraid I have the most boring slides out for everybody. I have no pictures because I am not a visual learner, and therefore I'm never very good at including pictures, I'm afraid. So how does this link to Ubuntu? I am because we are. I think the key thing that this links with is the strengthening social solidarity and the global connectedness. And the project that I'm going to talk about was one that took place between the UK and a school in the UK, a London borough and a university, and took place with Croatia. The focus wasn't about the UK and Croatia learning about one another. It was actually about how we schools and volunteers and social work students learned cultural competence and learned to work with people within the school from different backgrounds. But it actually also was about us learning about living in the UK and living in Croatia as well. And for Violeta and I has become part of a rather ongoing project over many, many years, to the point where our children are now friends. So I think social solidarity and global connectedness has been an outcome in many ways. I'm going to talk a little bit about the aims of that project and what I think the outcomes and relevance to social work students and social work in schools is. And this is a growing area for us in Wolverhampton as well, and a growing area of debate around social work and about where social workers should work and should be based, and how they connect to schools, communities, children and families. So I just thought we could reflect on some of that. Susie, if you could click me on, I'd be grateful. So this project, as Violeta talked about, actually took place in a school that's called Yelling School in the London Borough of Hillingdon, and I was at the time at Oxford University. It involved a school where children and families came from a very wide diversity of backgrounds, and we'll look at that. Many of the children were first-generation immigrants, and some were from disrupted and war-torn backgrounds, so came with lots of trauma in their lives as well. The majority of the children spoke a language that was different from that spoken in school, and that was what was very similar. Although these children weren't children from Roma backgrounds in general, some were, but mainly weren't. They were from a range of backgrounds. The language they spoke, that was spoken in school, was not their language, and that was the same as the Roma children in Croatia. Social work students were the mentors rather than volunteers, as they were in Croatia, and the social work students worked as mentors with the children, but they did have to volunteer to do that because it wasn't part of their statutory placement within the school. It was something that they volunteered to also be involved with. In Croatia, it involved a school, a region, which was VARAŽDIN, and a university, which was the University of Zagreb. Croatia had experienced a war that many of those who were in Croatia remembered, and which there were living memories on walls and in the streets of VARAŽDIN, although actually there had been very little disruption in VARAŽDIN itself. Children from the Roma community did not always go to school, as Violeta has showed in the presentation. My dog's now going to bark. And for those who did go to school, the language was different from that taught within school. In Croatia, there are also social pedagogues who are a form of social work that's very particular to Europe and is really interesting and actually has very high status, and who are often based in schools because it has an educational framework to the way that it approaches social engagement. What also happened in terms of the collectiveness and the social solidarity was these projects actually involved pupils, teachers, mentors, academics, policymakers and members of the community in the UK and in Croatia, all working together and learning together. So we actually cross boundaries in all sorts of ways. And that in itself was an act of strengthening social solidarity and increasing global connectedness. It's one of the sad things that we have lost now that we're not so involved in Europe. Susie, would you push me on, please? So the aim of this project was to actually increase children's speaking and listening skills in general, in order to encourage greater classroom engagement. And that was the aim of both elements of the project. And that's because speaking and listening skills are key underpinning skills for learning, for any form of learning and for any form of social engagement. So if children are not able to both speak speak in a language and listen to others and be involved in that general communication, they will not do well in any area of life. So it was critically important, and that was the point of this. The vehicle chosen was a mentoring scheme, and it was to be developed and delivered within the school. So it would have very specific elements, specific to the cultures of the school, specific to the culture of the country within which it was cited, but also similar. And the idea was that we would actually be able to evidence the children's engagement in learning activities, both from their own perspective, from that of their teachers, and from that of their parents. Susie, would you push it on? So there were a whole range of measures, and I'm not going to speak about those in general. In the UK, there were actually 30 pupils who were split into small groups, and they worked with a mentor. The small groups were about 5 or 6, and that was because these children actually were chosen for the project because they had very low levels of engagement. So they really needed very intensive and supportive environment to work with one another. The students were on placement as part of their social work undergraduate or master's level programme, and they acted as the mentors. And the programme was designed to fit with the school curriculum so that the children's learning supported that of their own learning. And it was really interesting how much of that learning and curriculum did cross over between the UK and Croatia, so that when images were shared and things were shared, actually there were an amazing set of similarities. The children were consulted with regard to those themes and got quite excited about inputting into and owning that. And the content of the session was also influenced by the mentors, because the social work students were actually also from very diverse backgrounds. Could you knock me on? Next slide, please. Susie, have I still got you? Have I still got everyone? Oh, have we lost Susie? Did we lose you, Susie?
You did lose me, yes. I should put your presentation back up, sorry.
Thank you, my dear. We had you in a very frozen state.
Probably the best way to have me, to be fair.
Would you go on to the next one?
Oh,
thank you.
Yeah, that one.
No, 2 more forward.
Oh, I'm going forward, yeah, sorry. Is that it? Is that the one?
Thank you. That's the one. Thank you. So, in terms of social work engagement, what was really interesting was actually it gave the social work students the opportunity to work with children and really think about critical aspects of a child's development that would actually then underpin and influence all the other outcomes later in their lives. And quite often social work comes in at the point, I think, where Nikola was talking about, the point there's a problem, as opposed to working with children in different ways over a longer period of time, because this took place over a year, and actually on one aspect, which was around communication. So working with in the small groups, the children were really encouraged to talk about what they were doing and to learn to listen to one another and to take it in turns to talk and to listen. They shared their work and activities with the children in school, and as Violeta said, so the children in Croatia were also learning English. But for the children in the UK, they were also learning English. They talked and learned about festivals, about culture, and about food, growing it, sharing it, making it, because it was obviously such a key aspect of people's lives. And it was really interesting, actually, when we went to Croatia, how many similar things have been grown in the gardens and the schools. And when you came back, Violeta, to that, it was actually things like growing sunflowers, growing pumpkins, all of those sorts of things, and the different ways they were used within the different cultural groups. The children used lots of pictures and visual prompts as ways of sharing across culture, and that was really interesting, I think. And in terms of social work engagement with children, actually that use of pictures and visual prompts is probably a very important one, because children were actually able to talk about those, to focus on those, to create those, and that we're very, very interested in those. So in terms of some research we did with the children, they told me off because I'd created a very, very boring questionnaire that was all black and white, and in fact they wanted it to be in colours and to have faces on it and all sorts of things. So as well, the way that children engaged with and thought about how they communicated, what they'd learned, and the roles they played was really important. And the mentors worked alongside the children to actually agree how to do this and how to reach shared outcomes. Could I have the next slide, please? I think I might have missed a slide, because I think that the slide we may have missed is that actually explains that the children in this school came from such a diverse set of backgrounds that it was, children were actually drawn from 89 different countries. There were 90 different languages that were spoken by children within the school. So the level of diversity for children was really, really high within this school. In terms of the measures, there were all sorts of measures used, some which came from children and parents and some which came from the school. But what was really interesting was that children and their parents actually recorded higher levels of gains from the project than pupils and their families, but actually they were actually more accurate when it came to their SAT scores at the end of the year, with many of the children outperforming the attainment forecast by the teacher. And that was particularly around listening and speaking and writing English skills. In terms of qualitative measures, the teachers really noticed that the children gained things like extended writing ability, that their concentration improved, probably because they were better able to understand what was going on in the class, and that they got better at speaking in class. And these were really important gains for the children, because they actually had been identified as children who were not engaging in learning and were quite separated from everyone in the school. So actually this was a really important project in terms of inclusion for children within the school. Could I have the next slide, please? In terms of strengthening social solidarity, the project would be deemed a successful one because it very much built the relationships between children in their small groups and with their mentors, and actually improve their engagement in class, so both with their teacher but also with their peers and their wider engagement with others in the school, so that they actually began to talk to others within the school. They were able also to be experts, which is always very important for all of us, or any of us, when we want to engage in something. So the thing they could talk about very knowledgeably was their own culture and their own festivals and their own traditions and their own foods. So they were able to share that and be an expert with others in class, in assemblies, and in the international project. And so they were experts in things with which they were familiar, and that was actually really important to their engagement in the wider community. It also allowed the other children in the school to learn about the diversity of cultures within their own school, and because they were so very wide, actually it gave children a real sense about the richness of the community within their school. And then they also learned about Croatia and the Roma community within Croatia, and the similarities and differences between their experiences. Can I have the next slide, please? And as you saw from Violeta, she had the poster. There was lots and lots in school about the project and how exciting it was. And the children did really have a sense of being engaged in something that was international. In terms of how this related to the way that social workers learn and the way that we have student placements, I just thought it was really important to reflect on some of the ways that this project met the learning outcomes and the knowledge and skills that social workers are meant to evidence throughout their careers and as student social workers. Because quite often I think we can be quite rigid in our expectations about social work placements, particularly within a UK context, and we can be inclined to think that statutory placements and the delivery of statutory duties and the operation of the law form the basis of social work. But actually, if you think about the range of skills and the knowledge base that social workers need to have, actually projects like this can be ones that deliver across the full range of outcomes, and they did. So if you look at the PCF in terms of skills and interventions, in terms of professionalism, in terms of knowledge, in terms of diversity and equality, rights and justice, professional leadership, context, organisational context, or context and organisations, critical reflection, analysis, values and ethics, all of those were able to be evidenced by the social work students in this project. Don't knock me on just yet, Susie, sorry. So they were actually enabled, and these are quotes from the children, from the students, actually about how the children were actually the students themselves as mentors were actually able to develop a good relationship with class teachers. Now, for any social work students or social workers who work in schools, that's actually a critical factor, is actually crossing that boundary where the teacher is the expert and the owner of the school and the organisation, and finding their place. And it actually enabled student social workers to find their place, which meant that the teachers used and trusted the social work students as well, to actually go to them for advice and knowledge, because it allowed the teachers to see the skills the students had, and it enabled the student social workers to actually approach the teacher, talk about progress, share the excellent work, and therefore find engagement. Sorry, Susie, can you knock me on now? The students were able also as mentors to support the development of the children. So they were actually able to see how their skills and their knowledge around child development impacted on the children, and they were actually able to use theory to practice work. So they were able to look at the theory of child development and then put that into practice. And they were actually also able to place that within its organisational context, because the organisational context was not about social work, it was about education. And they were actually able to bear witness to the children's learning experience. So they were able to talk about how the children grew in confidence and both were able and willing, and the two were obviously different and important, to share work themselves. They were able to go up to the head teacher or other teachers and say, look what I've done, or look what I've learned, and look what I've produced. And I think that was one of the most memorable and interesting things about the project, Violeta, wasn't it? I can see you nodding, you know, that it was really exciting and interesting to see that the way the children did this. Can you take me forward as well? So social workers were able to see how you can build confidence, and that's a critical part around diversity and equality as well, because the social work students were able as mentors to enable the children to be experts in their area. And they talked about that in their feedback. So how the children were experts in areas of different festivals, and how keen and eager they were to share and learn about that. So I think for social workers, quite often when they want to understand better about cultural engagement or cultural competence, actually children can be a really great way to learn about those things, because they want to tell you, they want to share. And it can be a really good basis for doing so. The student social workers also talked about how that increased their own cultural knowledge and cultural competence, because they learned as much as the children did through that of sharing. And through their wider engagement in the project, the social workers also learned about Croatia, and they learned about the Roma community. They met professionals from Croatia, both teachers, social pedagogues, academics, and those who worked in social policy around education. They learned about social pedagogy, which we're not so familiar with in the UK, and they took part in multi-professional conferences and exchanges, which we hosted in the UK. Can I go on to the next one, please? In terms of rights and justice as well, by enabling children to actually have expertise and be empowered, they were actually able to demonstrate how they were able to support children to take their place within a social and school community. So they actually were enabled to support the children to achieve social justice for themselves. They described the pride and fulfilment they felt, and how privileged they felt at actually having been fortunate enough to provide the children with that experience, and to work with them to do that. And the children themselves registered really high levels of engagement in their learning, and actually said that they enjoyed learning much more. They were able to contribute to class discussions, and they rated the importance of that much more highly than teachers did, actually, which actually is really important if you think about their engagement with school and learning in the future, that it's something they want to do, that they feel engaged in, they feel enabled to do. Next one, Susie, please. In terms of the Ubuntu, I am because we are, and I noticed actually that I have my African picture brought in the Gambia behind my head, actually. In terms of strengthening social solidarity and global connectedness, I think it can actually be achieved in so many different ways in social work, and we have to actually think about the ways that we might do that more creatively quite often, with thinking about the ways in which social work can actually work with families, achieve equality and diversity and social justice, actually use cultural knowledge and gain cultural competence by stepping outside of some of the narrow confines and the ways we might think about doing social work, and actually being prepared to engage in a wider variety of ways and thinking about the ways that social work can be performed. Thank you. That's me.
That's great. Thank you very much, Elaine. I don't know if people have got any questions. I have got a few things that I wanted just to sort of say, to ask you, really, you all. So there was the first thing was that when you were all talking, the thing that sort of occurred to me was, I think quite often in social work, we talk about culture and we talk about cultural competence and those sorts of things. And we are definitely, in the UK, we are a very, very multicultural society. But actually, I think sometimes that our cultural competence extends to perhaps thinking about just sort of understanding other cultures rather than understanding how other cultures have evolved and how that's impacted on how people behave today. So, and when Nikola was talking, I was thinking about in Germany, how in Germany they still don't record. In the UK we record everyone's race, really. It's like you wouldn't think twice about having your race, someone ask you what your race is, whereas they don't do it in Germany, because so they'd collect no data at all on individuals' race, and that's because of their history from the Holocaust. And I just think actually these things are they feel quite significant, actually, that from the UK to other countries, their history, in a way that the British history has an impact on us, but we perhaps don't. When we think about cultural competency, we think more about understanding what someone eats or what someone dresses like, or those sorts of things, rather than the impact that their own history has had upon how they think today. And I thought I was just wondering what you think about what that means in terms of building relationships with people, and how important that sort of cultural competency is in terms of that historical perspective in understanding how to engage with people. That was sort of my thoughts. I don't know whether people want to, whether there's to respond. Do you want to go first, Nikola?
Yes, I'll respond.
Yeah.
It's actually a very interesting question, because I can even see it in my own family. Like, I am a very proud Roma, and I am here presenting to everybody and sharing everything I know. But actually some of my family members are not so open about their heritage, and would rather leave what happened in the past. I mean, my great-grandfather, I mean, he had the tattoo from the concentration camps, and some of my family members would rather forget about that. What happened in the past is in the past, let's move on. And they would probably not wouldn't welcome questions that would remind them of the atrocities that happened during World War II, if that makes sense. And there are those who would welcome it, because they would feel that actually somebody is interested, and they recognize what my great-grandfather went through, or what my grandmother went through. So it depends on the person and their approach, and that's why I said you have to kind of have that sensitivity to know when to engage with the Roma in that sense.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, that's interesting. Thank you. Violeta, do you want to go next? Is there anything you want to say on that point?
Yes, of course. Thank you very much, Susan, for this interesting question. So I will just answer with one example that we had during our project. So probably, Elaine, you will notice that. When we went into the school, where children from a Roma community traveled each day from their local village to the school and back. It was completely different situation comparing with children who are leaving, or who are from the village, and their families are there, their mothers, their fathers, and they are very much included into the community. So the first group, where they just jumped to the school and came back, and then travel next day and travel back, it was a different process of assimilation. According to that model of cultural competencies, the attitudes were differences. Why? Because the knowledge was not enough, and they just don't know about the culture, about the language, and everything else. This second group, they were born in the village together with Croatian families. So nobody even thinks that they are from Roma community or some other communities. They are part of the community, and they have completely equal how to say status. They everybody just include them in the social life without any excuse. So my answer is learn about different cultures, learn about Roma cultural. Their songs are amazing. Their dresses, like Nicole, you mentioned, that's something that we don't know. For example, when our volunteers came from primary schools, Roma children teach them a lot of songs, a lot of different things from their culture, and that was amazing intercultural learning example. So I don't know, Susie, if I answered to your question, but I think it's very important to be part of the community and to participate in the community on equal level from the beginning.
No, that's really interesting. I suppose just thinking about what you said, it makes me think that perhaps what I'm thinking about with my sort of experience of children's social work, that perhaps when we're working with things like children in care, actually we do need to have perhaps a more Roma perspective on what they would want, how they would want their culture teaching to children who are almost definitely not in Roma placements because there are so few Roma foster carers. So actually, what we've probably got in reality in social work is sort of non-Roma parents, non-Roma social workers, because I mean, to be fair, it was Nikola is very unusual as a Roma social worker herself. There are not many social workers who come from Roma backgrounds. So actually lots of these children come into care from Roma households, but actually the people who are caring for them have no Roma experience at all. And actually how we understand how Roma people would want their own culture taught to their own children. So things like perhaps music, I'm not sure that Nikola was talking about. I'm not sure when I worked with children in care or in children in care, we would have thought about introducing them to Roma music as an important point. So I think that is an important thing, to understand what that culture values, not just what the culture is, but what it values and what it would want for its own children, really. Yes, I think that's important. Elaine, did you have anything you wanted to add to that point?
I'm afraid I've got hoovering going on in the background, so you'll probably hear it. So I was loath to unmute. No, not necessarily to do with that. And I think it is really important that's why actually allowing spaces in which people actually can use their own voice to communicate about themselves, I think is really important in social work, and it's critical to social justice. And in terms of when you were talking about I think if we are also thinking about social work in a global world and that strengthening of social solidarity, actually understanding how social workers practice in other worlds, and also how academics do and how we teach and learn, because if you go to countries like the Netherlands, where I used to be involved in a master's program, actually ethics programs and ethics approval of research is extremely contentious, for example, with it being seen as very important that a professor, the educator, has complete control themselves over what they decide to do. And that comes as a result of having been an occupied country and feeling that your research was in a totalitarian state where your research is decided for you. And so academic freedom becomes very important. So I think you're right, actually understanding the basis on which a culture is making its decisions is really critical. And that involves, people that we're working with across professional boundaries, as well as the communities we might be working with within social work.
Yeah. No, that's interesting. Thank you. I know Sharon has made it in the chat. She's made a comment and she says that Sharon has said she feels like that in the UK we collect statistics about different cultures, but we don't engage with those around us. And I think that's probably an interesting point, actually, isn't it? In terms of, I was thinking perhaps something similar in terms of that we are very good at collecting statistics in the UK, and we are an incredibly diverse community now in the UK, and that's been very rapid since over the last sort of 70 years, since the end of the Second World War. It's become an incredibly diverse community. So I wonder if actually we set up our systems, our social work systems and our way of doing social work at a point when we were a much more homogenous society. And now we've got this much more multicultural society, and we're still using the same systems, the same approaches and the same style of social work. And that made me think a bit about actually that importance perhaps of moving social work out into things like schools. You talk about social pedagogy, Elaine, and I think that's it again. It's an interesting sort of subject, perhaps something we can't really get into today, but actually perhaps what we need in the UK is a social work that looks beyond the very sort of liberal social work that emerged after the Second World War, which was really about dealing with things like child protection and the 5 giants and sort of giving people those sorts of things, and now meeting people's basic needs. And now we need to think about a social work that understands and is responsive to people who've got different experiences of the state. So people whose experience of the state is not one that is the state's there to help you, which I think is perhaps at the root of a lot of our problems with social work and Roma communities. Did you want to come back, Elaine?
Yeah, I was just going to say, I think some of that would pick up the things that Nikola was talking about, which is about, you know, if you go to talk with a family, what image does that family have about the way that conversation which is going to go? And is the image, particularly around child protection social work, going to be that people that are going, you know, it is the social worker as child snatcher type image, and so I think actually, yeah, engagement by social work in different ways, which may well be within schools, may actually be much more community focused and community orientated, not only means that the community learns about social work and its practice, but social work learns about the community and its values. And I think, Sharon, that would pick up some of your points about the collecting statistics, but actually engaging with culture. I think it would allow us to cross those boundaries, and we might then do so more effectively. You know, we have got really record numbers of children going into care or experiencing interventions and families, and actually it might give us a way of being able to have some of those conversations differently and think about them differently, because we might be better understand communities and feeling enabled to empower the community to work with us rather than doing to people. Yeah, it'd be very interesting.
Yeah. Nikola, did you want to come in?
Yeah, and I totally agree with what Elaine said, because at the moment when the social worker gets involved with a family, it's always when there's like a massive issue. Social workers are not seen engaging with the community in a general way. They are not seen in the school when the parents come to pick up their children. And I think that would kind of bring a more natural and more human side to the social worker, and that would be seen by different communities, not just this ghost that appears when things go very wrong, but somebody who's there, who understands. And probably I think it would be seen as a sort of getting social work involvement as a prevention rather than when there's a crisis.
Yeah, and I think that, I can see that. And I think the difficulty for things like what we would call early help services is, I think a lot of the research that we have about early help services in the UK definitely is that they're actually seen as that they're just seen as a funnel into social work services themselves, rather than being seen say, in the way that social pedagogues might be seen in Europe as something quite different, although there's a lot of similarities between what a social pedagogue is and what a social worker is on the continent, that social pedagogues cannot take children away from people. They do not engage in those very formal pieces of social work. So there is a distinction which enables that perhaps to have them to engage in a different way. And perhaps if we've had social workers in school, which is happening, I mean, we're seeing more and more social workers in school, and we have lots of students now out on placement in school placements. But actually it would hopefully mean that social workers are seen within the communities and seen by communities whose experience of the state is not one of having lived in a state like the UK, which has never been occupied, which has been liberal since essentially that liberalism began in the sort of 18th century, the end of the 1700s. So we've had this very liberal state where freedom has been valued. It's all of that time. So people don't have in living memory in the UK a sense of having been oppressed. And like you say, Nikola, about having children taken, not just by social, because in the UK, if we talk about having your children taken, you're only talking about social work. You're not talking about the state coming and taking your children because you are of a particular culture. And that is somebody's experience in perhaps other countries. And I think that's something perhaps as social workers we don't hold on to. We think that people are, when they're talking about social workers steal your children, they're talking about stealing your children because you're a bad parent, not because you're a Roma parent or because you're a Jewish parent or that sort of that sort of thing, or because you're a sort of a parent with disabilities or that sort of thing. So yeah, I think it's that sort of reaching out and social work understanding that in the UK we're now speaking to a multicultural audience who have very different perceptions of things. Elaine, yes.
I was going to say, and Nikola talking about the experience of Roma communities of forced settlement and child removal and fostered into families within the host community, actually very similar to experiences of Aboriginal communities in Australia, for example. You know, with again, where the realities of that have had very serious impacts on that community and continue to have, and the same again for First Nation communities in Canada, for example. So and a lot of the research actually that is talked about in terms of fetal alcohol syndrome is actually done on communities, First Nation communities in Canada, which is taken entirely out of its cultural context, which is actually really relevant to that cultural context as well. So I think, you know, it's actually ensuring that we understand when we talk about culture and we share knowledge as well, that we actually think about the base to that knowledge and where it comes from and how it was obtained and what's influenced that as well. I know you know that's a little bugbear of mine, Susie. So
yeah.
But in terms of it is. But in terms of placements and thinking about social work, I just think it's really exciting opportunity to think for us in Wolverhampton, but elsewhere and with other people within who are joining us today, about how do we actually make our social work practice and make our social work learning and make these engagements about ones in which there is that shared transfer of knowledge between communities, between social work, between us, so that we actually are able to all feel enabled to engage in those conversations and think about how or how could we do it differently, what it might look like, because I think there are a lot, and that's why I particularly wanted to talk about the PCF and the learning outcomes, because there are a lot of concerns that if students don't learn a particular thing and tick a particular box, they won't have learned something, whereas actually that project allowed those students to evidence every single one of the learning outcomes. And yet it would have been the sort of thing that might have made people nervous at first about whether students would hit their targets and meet their learning outcomes. So it was just, I think, thinking about things differently can be exciting, can't it?
Yeah, definitely. Violeta, did you want to, is there anything that you want to come back on and come in say on any of those points?
Yes, of course. Thank you, Susan. I completely agree with the comments that you made, Elaine, and you, Nicola. And I just would like to add one thing that I think is very, very important. For example, this is from my professional part of from my professional career when I was working as a psychologist in Center for Rehabilitation for Children with Disabilities, and some of them were from Roma communities. And I remember the contact that so I'm not a social worker for myself, I'm a psychologist once again, but I remember the contact of a social worker in that institution and the parents when they came to the institution. So I think it's the question of basic trust and perception. For example, I remember those parents knocking on the door and coming to that center asking a social worker for help. Can you help me with food? Can you help me with, I don't know, school textbooks? Can you help us with transportation money for bus or something like that? And that was the perception of parents towards social worker. So very important thing is that those children were in institution. They were not living with their parents. They just came each Friday, Saturday, Sunday to visit their parents. Some of them are far away, so they are visiting their parents maybe once per month, maybe 2 times per semester or whatever. And that was the question of basic trust. I don't want to say that everything was brilliant, that communication goes without any difficulties. Of course, like all other parents, like all other children, they always have some issues that are part of misunderstandings and so on and so on. But I remember the perception of social worker from parents' point of view was, this is the person who will help us in education for our children, who will help us to raise our children, and they will become, I don't know, one day, whatever is their further career. So I think the basic answer is in communication and in something that we call in psychology in contact. If you have very good contact, then people or parents will trust you and they will probably see you as somebody who will help, not somebody who will take away the children. It's not going always very easy. Of course, there are a lot of issues, but it's changing, I think, a little bit right now in Croatia. At the beginning, it was much more difficult. So thank you for listening.
No, that's great. That's really helpful. Thank you. I don't know whether anyone has any other questions. There are not any questions in the chat. What I'll do is just say, are there any points that the panel want, any sort of final points that the panel want to make? So if there are any other questions, if you want to sort of put them into the chat in the next sort of few minutes, then I'll put them to the panel. But otherwise, I'll just go to the panel and ask if there's any final points the panel want to make, perhaps in terms of what they think that something that we perhaps should do or we could do to improve our engagement with Roma communities. If we could do sort of one thing, what might you think that we should do differently to engage with Roma communities or engage better with Roma communities? Nikola, do you want to go first?
Right, so in my experience, I've seen a lot of social workers sort of come in and not explain why they are really there and what's expected of parents. So I think the communication is extremely important. Clear communication, what is expected, why we are there, what is the issue, how to address it, what support is there available, instead of sort of going in, explaining, yeah, I'll come to check up in a week's time, and then, you know, not giving clear guidance on what steps to take and how to improve the situation. It's that sort of a rigid attitude. This is how things are, and I know the legislation and I don't need to explain what the legislation is. But actually it is important to keep in mind that they actually don't know the legislation. they might not even know how the system works. So it's that communication that needs to be there. I feel that that's the key.
That's great. Thank you. Elaine, do you want to go next?
Sorry, I couldn't get my unmute to unmute. I was reading the things at the side where Sharon was asking about how does she actually find out about her local Roma community. And Kelsey had been talking about some work she had done at an orphanage, and about actually ensuring that people's identity of themselves is at the forefront. And I suppose I was just thinking maybe that's the things that Nikola had talked about earlier about, you know, clear expectations and communicating what we do. I'm wondering also if one of the things we might do as a university is actually use this as a starting point rather than an end point, I guess, and actually start this as a project for ourselves, maybe working with you, Nikola, and the organisation that you have founded, to actually think about how could we build a project that's quite interesting to people about Roma communities within the West Midlands. What would Roma communities want to say to social work about themselves and social care, taking it out more broadly, and it might actually be a project that would be really nice that we could start and actually work with people here and others to think about how we could take forward.
No, I think that'd be great. Nikola, did you want to come back on that?
Yeah, I think it's a great idea, because it would be refreshing to see that actually the social work profession is actually listening to the Roma community, because I don't think their voices have been heard as much as they should be. So absolutely, yes, I quite like the idea.
Great. And Violeta, is there anything you want to add at the as an ending, sort of just as to end things off?
Yes, thank you very much, Susie, for question. Thank you for comments, Elaine and Nikola. I would just like to end one important thing, that this topic was not just about Roma national minority in Croatia or in UK, but that was intercultural learning in general. For myself, I think that we are very privileged that we live in part of Croatia where we have a lot of people or children in schools that are from Roma families, but we are also very happy to have other minorities, like Italian minority on south part of Croatia, or Czech, or what other minorities. And I'm always so happy to see that they have their own language, they have their own classes, they learn about their own culture, and that's extremely important. Opposite way, I'm always very happy to see that, for example, Croatian children in Austria have special classes and they can learn Croatian language there. So that's something that we call intercultural learning, and it's extremely helpful for all of us. I'm coming to the beginning when I told you that our students came from primary school and they share songs, they share Roma culture. They were so happy to learn a lot from little children. They were 10, 11, 12 years old, and that was amazing learning. So thank you very much for organizing such an important discussion, important panel, and important important issue that was presented, and I'm really privileged and very happy to have opportunity for participation. Thank you very much.
No, that's great. We've been delighted to have you all. I was just going to very quickly ask, in terms of Nikola, do you want to respond to Sharon? I think you probably would be the best person to respond to Sharon about, she's asked, how do you find out about local Roma communities in her area? In her local authority, they seem invisible. It is possible, I suspect, that Roma communities are concentrated in very particular parts of the UK. They're not equally distributed amongst the whole UK. So there's high populations in the East Midlands, the West Midlands, the North West, I think there's a large population, and in the Yorkshire and the Humber there's quite a large populations. But I think other than that, they're relatively low numbers in other places. But Nikola, have you got anything you want to add to that question?
Yeah, I mean, it is very difficult because a lot of the Roma will identify as being Czech, being Slovakian, being Hungarian. So there's no way of finding out which area has the most Roma. I mean, they tend to concentrate, like if there's a community center or something like that, where they offer advice. So for example, in Wolverhampton, we have the RMC, the Refugee and Migrant Center, which is a great point of finding volunteering work. And they work very closely with the Roma community. So there are ways how to find out. If you contact like the local authority, they will kind of pinpoint you to services that are provided for immigrants or the Roma. And I would definitely start there.
Sorry, the only thing I would say is that we don't have actually in the UK, although we have quite good statistics because of, I think, mainly non-declaration. So lots of Roma people don't declare themselves as Roma. And that's the same for gypsies and travellers actually as well, but both those populations don't declare. So in the last census, there were 58,000 estimated gypsy and travellers in the UK, but that was thought to be an underestimate, and that they were thought to be about between 100,000 and 300,000, and in addition another 200,000 Roma. But actually this last census only had 58,000 down in the UK. I think in the European Union, the Council of Europe estimates that there are 225,000 Roma people in the UK. So we may get, obviously the census is taking place, so next year we may have a better sense in the UK of how many Roma people are here, but that's still likely to be an underestimate based upon people not declaring their correct race because they are fearful of it. So I think that's a challenge for people, for local authorities, in fairness, working with these communities, because they actually probably don't have very accurate figures unless they've got large populations of Roma people. I think particularly in areas where there are very few, it'd be much easier for those very few small numbers of Roma people just to disappear, for them to deliberately make themselves invisible for fear of discrimination. So I think it's probably a real problem, Sharon, that you talk about, and it will depend on actually where you are in the country. But yeah, I think that's a real issue. So thank you again, everybody. Thank you for people coming, and thank you to the panelists for what I think has been a really interesting debate. And I think hopefully we could perhaps arrange some other things moving forward for our webinar series. Just for the people attending, just to draw your attention to, I have put some links into the chat for Nikola's website, and she has a Twitter profile. And so you can follow Roma Reach, which is her organisation there. You can also follow us, the Wolverhampton Social Work, on Twitter, which is @WLV Social Work. And we are running a webinar series where we've got a series that's starting in mid-April of 4 webinars around domestic violence. One looking at engaging with perpetrators, where we've got Dr. Liz Kelly, who is the Professor Liz Kelly, who developed the DASH risk assessment. And then we've got one on coercive control, which is going to be part of the definition of domestic violence with the new domestic violence bill. So that will be quite a big change for social workers. The next one is on mothering, domestic violence and social work, where we're going to discuss the difficult issue of how social workers work with mothers who are victims of domestic violence. And the final one was going to be on domestic violence, is going to be on practitioners and how practitioners have responded, the experience of practitioners, so social workers and domestic violence workers, housing workers, all sorts of different workers responding to domestic violence under the pandemic, and the issues that have been that workers and practitioners have had to respond to in terms of domestic violence. And that's some research that's currently ongoing. So you can follow those. If we will advertise them on Twitter. We'll send them around as much as we can. But if people want to look out for them, they'll be free to register in the future. And all of them are recorded and then uploaded to our YouTube channel. So for those of you who want to catch up, or people who aren't able to attend any of those, you should be able to catch up later. So thank you again everyone for coming, but that is it, and hopefully we'll see you again in the future. So thank you for coming, and thank you to the panelists.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.